Welcome to the Family Law Now podcast. I'm Russell Alexander. We're doing something new today. This is new to us. We usually focus on substantive legal processes and pithy legal subjects. But today we're going to talk about a movie called The Marriage Story. I want to thank our three guest speakers today. Brian Galbraith, thank you for being here. Owner of Galbraith Family Law. Brian is a collaboratively trained lawyer with offices in Newmarket, Barrie, and new offices now in Toronto. I want to thank Abi Adeusi, who is a trained collaborative family lawyer as well. Abi has offices in Peterborough and the Durham region in Ontario. Thank you for being here with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Finally, I'd like to thank Jonathan Paynter, an accredited family mediator and registered social worker with collaborative practice training. He's also a member of the Collaborative Practice Institute. Jonathan has offices in Newcastle and Peterborough and serves the Central East region.
Thanks, Russ.
So today we're talking about Marriage Story Deconstructed. The movie storyline, it was produced by Heyday Films and Netflix with a budget of $18.6 million. Charlie Barber, played by Adam Driver, is a successful theater director in New York City. Nicole, played by Scarlett Johansson, is a former teen actress. The couple is experiencing marital troubles and sees a mediator who suggests they each write down what they like about one another. But Nicole is too embarrassed to read hers aloud, and they decide to forego counseling. Nicole is offered a starring role in television pilot in Los Angeles and goes there with their child. While in Los Angeles, Nicole hires Nora Farshaw, played by Lauren Den, a family lawyer. Charlie meets with Jay Moretta, played by Ray Lolita, a brass and expensive lawyer who urges Charlie to fight dirty. Later, Charlie returns to Los Angeles and hires Bert Spitz, played by Alan Alda, an empathetic and retired family lawyer who favors a civil and conciliatory approach. Nancy Katz, played by Martha Kelly, is an appointed expert evaluator and monitors a night with Charlie and Henry. One of the central legal issues in the movie and their divorce case is jurisdiction and whether the child should be moved from his home in New York City to Los Angeles so mom can pursue her career. The wife's lawyer, Nora, and her comments during trial prep were interesting. She says the idea of a good father was invented 30 years ago. Fathers are expected to be silent, absent, unreliable, and selfish. She is brass and cunning and has a good knowledge of family law. Charlie's first lawyer, Jay, that's played by Ray Lolita. I thought it was a good choice in terms of an actor. He's portrayed as a dirty, aggressive lawyer. His legal strategy in this case, in their first meeting, I think may have been the correct one. In my view, New York City was clearly the right jurisdiction for reasons I'm going to set out later when we do our mobility analysis. A couple funny scenes. One scene when he says my rate's $9.50 an hour and his junior lawyer Ted is $400. So if you have any stupid questions, ask Ted. I thought that was telling in terms of the expense of litigation. He was concerned, the lawyer, Jay, was concerned from starting from a point of reasonableness. He says they're starting from a point of crazy, so they're going to end up somewhere between reasonable and crazy, which is crazy. So this is sort of his mindset when he takes on the file. Overall, I think the character accurately portrayed many lawyers that I've come across who are extremely litigious. It doesn't make them bad lawyers. It just means that's their nature and that's the way they choose to litigate. We have collaborative practice training. We choose to do things differently. Jay wanted to take the slash and burn approach to litigation. I find that these lawyers usually do not finish the files. The clients usually run out of money. The clients usually end up retaining somebody else or representing themselves when the money's all spent. The burn rate in terms of fees gets quite expensive when you have litigation strategies as the one that Jay was proposing at the beginning in their first meeting. So that was my take on Jay. What did you think, Abi? What was your view of that lawyer?
I agree with you. But when he said, "Oh, let's get a private investigator," I was alarmed. You're going to try and find something where there isn't any, potentially. And I guess his ethos is starting from the point of, he thinks they're going to land in Crazy City. So he's putting all the stops out. And yes, he's very expensive. And his assistant may not be as expensive. I think both of them are expensive anyway. But there was no give, I guess, I don't know. There was no give as to all of these things that I'm trying to encourage my client to do. Are these things that he can afford, and does he really want them? And his fight was clear from the beginning, because Charlie, the husband, had said to the lawyer that my wife is being represented by Nora. So it was because of the two, that kind of the ego between the two lawyers. Okay, because it's the lawyer, that's how I'm going to approach this file, and this is what we're going to do, rather than what does the client want, and how do we achieve that, either in a collaborative or even in litigation.
Yeah, that seems to be a common theme. What about you, Brian? What's your take on Jay?
Well, we see lots of these kinds of lawyers, and they're the ones that give family law lawyers a bad reputation, because they make a mountain out of a molehill. They'll make a small issue into a big issue. And he was interested in getting to crazy, which is not what any client wants. They want to get to sanity, and they want some peace. And he was not going to take him there, and because that's his practice. And it's unfortunate. A lot of people take this approach to practicing law.
Right. Jonathan?
Yeah, one of the most interesting scenes of the movie for me was when they were in the hallway of the courthouse just before the hearing, and Charlie's lawyer and Nicole's lawyer were sort of chatting with each other in the hallway, and being super friendly and talking about how they had spent the weekend with each other and making plans to hang out socially. And then they walk into the room and they're just vicious with each other. And watching the parents' reaction to that is very, very interesting. And I think Brian's right. Like that would really give a lot of lawyers bad names. And I think law is probably very different down in LA than it is up here. And if you're in a small town court like in Lindsay or Peterborough or Coburg, I can't imagine the judge having very much patience with the way that they were going back and forth with each other there.
Yeah. But we need to be mindful of that, right? We're professionals and we're colleagues. I'll see Abby and we'll be in the courthouse and we'll be nice and talk about where we're going to have lunch or whatever. And clients get suspect, right? It's like, why are you being so nice to the lawyer on the other side? They think, they're worried you're not going to fight for them, right? So I think that little exchange, I think Hollywood got it right. You're still professionals, but you're advocates at the same time, but the public doesn't necessarily perceive it that way.
Yeah.
The other thing I found interesting about Jay's firm, we see this in a lot of bigger centers. They take this team approach to litigation. They'll have a senior lawyer, maybe a named partner, and then one or two junior lawyers on the file. Sometimes they'll come to court and carry the suitcase or briefcase for the other lawyer, and you get a team approach to the litigation, right? So that increases the expense as well. All right, let's talk about Charlie's second lawyer, Bert. This is, I think, your topic, Brian. This is Alan Alda.
Bert was played by Alan Alda, and I most certainly identified more closely with this lawyer than the other ones in Marriage Story. Some of the things that Bert said, I've said, and I thought was great. And but it was interesting. One of the things that I noted he was talking about, and it kind of became comic, is he was saying, well, you should get an apartment in LA because it would look better for the court. And Charlie would say, well, are we going to court? And no, we just sort of have to prepare for court, but we're not going to court. And he kept saying that over and over again. And I've done that too, right? And I see how ironic it must be to the client to hear us say that we need to prepare for court, but we're not going to court. And I think that's telling about why collaborative practice is so much better, because the professionals are not allowed to go to court. And so we're not talking about setting a scene or putting your best foot forward in case the matter goes to court, because there's such a deep commitment in the collaborative process to not going to court, because if the clients go to court, the lawyers are out of a job. So the lawyers certainly aren't threatening court or preparing for court because they're not going to court. And so that was one of the elements that stood out for me with Bert. And another one, I enjoyed the fact that he said, oh, I've done this 4 times, 3 divorces, but this one's gonna stick. And I felt sorry for old Bert. I hope he's found matrimonial bliss this time around. The other thing that I noted about Bert is when he came together with Nora and they started negotiating, it was really sort of an old-fashioned negotiation between 2 lawyers. It wasn't, the clients did not have an opportunity to speak. The lawyers were just talking about their positions and their strengths of their positions and whether they would be successful in court. And, most in a collaborative context, we would be looking at the interests and we would be asking the clients, tell me why you want to be stationed in LA. Why do you want to have your home in New York with the children? And we would dig down into what's important and what motivates the clients. And we'd hear it from the clients and we would be helping them come together. But these lawyers didn't help them to come together. They just added fuel to the fire and made it more difficult for them to reach an agreement. So, yeah.
So Brian, do you think Hollywood got it right with Bert?
I think, I think there's lots of lawyers like Bert. There's, I think Bert has not had the paradigm shift and didn't get
he's almost there.
Yeah, he's a natural. And, I think he should sign up for one of our trainings and we could get him right on board because, and that's the other thing is poor Bert, he was not playing with someone who is like-minded. He had a litigator on the other side, and often these cases go to the lowest common denominator, right? Which is that traditional litigation warrior approach. Instead of the interest-based approach.
Jonathan, what's your take on Bert?
Yeah, I think he was definitely portrayed accurately. I've definitely met lawyers like Bert. I think where he fell flat was Charlie didn't really feel like he was standing up for him enough, and I think he was outclassed by the other lawyer who was kind of running rampant right over him, right? And she had given her client some very early and good advice to move the child to a new school, to get him settled in LA, to make all these great arguments about why LA is the home base. And Bert didn't really have a good argument against those things and basically said, well, you might as well just agree with what she's saying because there's nothing I can do for you. And that's when Charlie decided to go with the more vicious lawyer.
Bert was agreeing with him, saying, yeah, there's lots of space in LA. So it seems like 3-on-1 at that point, right? Abby, what do you think of Bert?
I agree with what everyone has said. I find he was too laid back. There are some lawyers like that, of course. I find he was too laid back, and he's one of those people where he sees the good in everything and he expects the good in everything or in everyone. And so that's kind of where he's coming from. He made a statement when he met his clients, something like, in divorce, you see good people at their worst. And that is indeed true. But I did not feel that, yes, he was compassionate, he recognizes where they were at, but he wasn't able to assist his client to the extent that the client needed. It was more, we're all going to be good, we're all going to be, we expect everyone to act in a certain way. But as lawyers, we know that lawyers have different ways that they practice, and we have different ways that we kind of even interact with each other, and he didn't bring any of that to the table to assist his client to any great extent. That's my thought. You'd remember sorry.
Go ahead.
No, you remember in the, when they had a one-on-one private meeting, and he was kind of telling a story that his client didn't want to hear, and wasn't assisting his client in any way. So it just shows that, yes, he's a good man, he's a good lawyer, he knows what he's doing, but he wasn't being effective for his client, not in any real way.
Not in the face of Nora, right? If he had a different, not when facing Nora.
Absolutely.
I don't blame Charlie changing his lawyer when he had to cope with who Nora was, and that totally made sense. That when you have a warrior on the other side, then you probably need to get your own warrior, and unfortunately.
Yeah,
Okay.
the sidebar with Charlie, where he's telling the story and Charlie's looking at the clock saying, how much is this costing me, right? This story. Yeah. I thought, sorry, go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, I was just going to say that, I think Bert exemplifies the point that you really have to shop around to find the lawyer that works best for you. Because as Abi said, every lawyer has a slightly different approach. They all have different personalities. And it's so important that you find someone that you connect with and who's right for the job that you want them to do, right? If you're going to go with collaborative, you need to find someone who's collaborative. You can't go in with someone who's going to open up with a machine gun volley, and everyone's going to be left wondering what the heck just happened. And if you're going to court, you have to have someone who's going to be firm but fair, and make sure that they can prepare their client for all the things that court mean, right? And it was very interesting to see that we saw the couple before they met their lawyers, and when they got through the other end, after they met their lawyers, they were completely different people, because they had to be pigeonholed into this role in order to play the game at court.
Yeah. Nicole was almost hypnotized by her lawyer. If she had hired a Bert type lawyer and we had two Berts, they probably would have settled it that afternoon. My take on Bert, he's the closest in the movie to a collaborative lawyer. I like how he warns of the costs of the process in terms of money, time, the emotional stress. And he had a little side comment that wasn't really fleshed out in the movie. He said he wants to follow the truth. I think what he meant was the client's truth, right? What's important to the client, as opposed to the other lawyers just dictating what the outcome's going to be. So I think, they could have potentially fleshed that out a little bit. We all kind of look for the truth. It's our client's goals and interests and underlying interests that they may not even know about. So I thought that was a nice little tidbit we got from Bert. So the social worker, Nancy, Jonathan, every social worker I talk to about this movie just rolls their eyes when they talk about this scene. Give us your take on Nancy.
Yeah, you can add me to the list of people who are rolling their eyes.
Okay.
I don't think she did a very good job portraying social worker. I looked into the actor who played her, and she is a stand-up comedian. And her approach is a very dry humor, where she's making jokes, but she's not emotionally reacting to them. And everyone's laughing because she's saying these really funny things, but she's completely flat. And that's kind of how she portrayed this character in the movie. She didn't really interact much with the family. She didn't ask them any relevant questions. She didn't do anything to help the family feel comfortable or relaxed. And, you know, when I'm doing my work as a custody and access assessor, you know, it's really important for me to do my best to interact with people in a friendly and positive way, to help them feel as comfortable as possible around them. My goal isn't to go in and help them feel like they're judged. Now, doesn't mean that they don't all feel that way anyways. But I feel like she didn't do anything to help the family feel comfortable or natural. And but I do think that Charlie and Nicole's anxiety about the assessment was pretty accurately portrayed. Like they were both pretty worked up about the interview and being nervous about that. And I thought they did a really good job of portraying that.
And I love this scene. I think he cuts his hand or his arm and he wraps it up. He's bleeding all over the place and ends up passing out. I mean, I think that's what he felt like. The assessment was just bleeding him out, just killing him.
Yeah, I think that was certainly an analogy for the way he felt after she left the room. Like
for sure.
And it didn't also seem to fit. Like we saw that scene. We also didn't see her interact with the mom at all. And I would never do an assessment, or it's very, very rare that I would do an assessment where I would only see one side of the family, because you just then don't get an accurate understanding of what the baseline for this child is. If they're really hyper at one home, does that mean they're also hyper at the other home? And you also want to look at other things like school, how they interact with their extended family, like grandparents, how they are in extracurricular activities. So you really need to develop a really thorough and broad picture of what the children's life is like, and seeing one parent at their home isn't really a good indication of that.
But we indirectly got the mom's take when she was getting prepared by her lawyer for the assessment, right? We knew what her answers were, but the lawyer had prepared her to say the right thing. Yeah.
And the other thing is that it didn't seem to, like, we never heard about what impact this assessment had. It was never talked about in the movie after that one scene where he's bleeding all over the place. So I'm not really sure it added much to the story. I think it would have been better if they had a couple of lines later on to indicate how this assessment had influenced the outcome.
Well, I was laughing during a lot of that scene because of how she was behaving and so on. But then I was thinking, okay, we know what the real world is like. I wonder if other people are thinking this is what a social worker is. Oh my goodness, this is not good.
Scare the hell out of the parents. I think procedurally is accurate, right? You get assigned a case management judge who doesn't know anything, and they'll order a social work report or an assessment, and they go from there. So we do see a lot of assessments. I think the actual substance of the worker sitting there in that awkward silence is certainly not reflective of what really happens. But what's your take, Abi?
I think the questions she was asking was, you know, apart from everything that Jonathan and Brian has said already, the questions she was asking was kind of disturbing for me, because she wasn't focusing on the child in the dad's home. She was asking, and in a way, asking the child to compare. You know, what do you do at your dad's house and what do you do at your mom's house? So the child is in that awkward position of having to say what we do here and, you know, what we do in mom's house and what we do in dad's house. In fact, it was what we do in dad's house and what we do, as a child, we referred to it, my house. So there was a difference between dad's house and his real house, which is mom's house. And then she got into a conversation with dad as well, and talking about space, how LA was better. Like, I wouldn't have thought that that's something that should be happening in her coming to assess. So, I mean, if a client came and told me that that's what's happened, I would be alarmed. I would challenge every single thing that she recommends.
And her
because she's
questioning why he wants to be in New York.
where he want, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's not the job. So I found that quite alarming. I think they abandoned from the experience, kind of my take from it, because I'm a bit like Jonathan. I was like, what happened to her in the end? What happened to the assessment? And I think that the parties realized that this is not helping and they just abandoned ship. I don't think they took it to its natural conclusion. It was nice for us to see the process, that this is what happens or could happen, but it was so scary for the parties. They were like, we can't do this.
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
I thought it was, I liked it when Charlie was getting prepared for the assessor's visit, and he was trying to put paintings everywhere and tidy up, and talking to his friend on FaceTime.
Yeah.
What does this look like? Does this look homey enough and warm enough? And,
but the fear
I'm
is
sure
real.
that is very normal.
The fear is real. I talk to clients about
real.
getting a children's lawyer. They go, "What the hell's that? They're going to show up in the lab coat and walk around our house." They just don't know.
Yeah, for sure.
I did like the first scene of the movie with the mediator, though, where he's get the parents to come up with positives about each other. I really like that approach. It really terribly backfires for him, because I think the mom's emotions about the whole situation are just too raw, and she can't handle the thought of directly negotiating this, because she's feeling so hurt about it, and that's why she goes to get a lawyer, so that lawyer can kind of act as a go-between, so she doesn't have to deal with Charlie directly.
Yeah.
But I did like the approach.
I did too. I like the approach, and I've done it in mediations. But I thought maybe that fell apart because of the power imbalance between the two. He was the director in their work life, and she was the actor that was following his direction. He always seemed to be making the decisions in the family, and maybe she just didn't feel like she could. She couldn't be present in that mediation process. She just, because of that, the stature between the two of them in a way.
Yeah. But the flip side of that, she was the director in their personal life, right? He couldn't order off a menu. She would tie his shoe up. She couldn't open up a jar, or he couldn't open up a jar. So her role in the home is the opposite of that. But I thought writing their thoughts down about each other was a timely trick by the director. They open with that scene, and then they close with that scene. With her thoughts finally being read aloud by Charlie. But yeah, amazing. A nice piece of storytelling. So let's talk about process questions. So Abi, we have this 4-way in-office settlement meetings. We've all been there in some fashion. Let's discuss that in Hollywood's portrayal of the settlement meeting. Do you think it was accurate? Did they get it right? What was your experience with that scene?
I think the setting, the trying to make people feel comfortable, all of that was quite accurate. What I noticed was Nora was very much in charge. She took control. And she literally ran rings around the other lawyer, and she knew her case, and she knew, so she was much more prepared than the other lawyer. And I say that because there was a question that was asked about, I think the guy was going to get a grant or something, and he didn't even know that. So he was asking his client, really? So it made him unprepared. So in a 4-way meeting like that, both lawyers must be prepared, must have adequate information about what's going on, so that whilst there might be an imbalance of power between the parties, there shouldn't be an imbalance of power between the lawyers, and you should have the information at your fingertips. And anytime, you notice that anytime a conversation wasn't going, not many times, the way Nora, the lawyer, wanted it, she would de-escalate and talk about water, talk about the space in New York. She got all the parties at the table, including the opposing lawyer, to be agreeing with her. That was a skill. That was definitely a fabulous thing. What else did I notice about this? There was a the real issue, obviously, between the parties was mobility, and clearly the wife had given as much information to her lawyer, or maybe the lawyer got it out of her. There was this Copenhagen trip where, in justifying why the parties should move back to New York, the wife was saying, well, we were supposed to come here for a year, we didn't come. The lawyer said, well, Bart said, my client's expectation was that she would come back. And clearly, it demonstrated to me that his expectation and what they had agreed or discussed wasn't the same.
Yeah.
So he kind of lost that argument there. So again, go back to the point, you have to listen to your client and understand your case, even in negotiation. It's not only, we don't only prepare when we're going to court, we have to prepare when we're negotiating as well. And, you know, so that's about it. I'll jump in a minute.
Those are great tips. Brian, what's your take on the four-way meeting? Hollywood get it right?
Well, yeah, I've seen meetings like that, and that's before I took interest-based mediation training, and now meetings are not like that. But that was a very typical traditional meeting where the lawyers are the mouthpiece, and they're trying to persuade each other as to the merits of their case, rather than trying to understand each other, help the parties understand each other, and help the parties find a compromise. They were just trying to out-bully each other, which isn't a very effective strategy when you're trying to negotiate. And that's why, you know, it ended up in court because they weren't able, nobody was able to bully the other person into submission.
Often in those meetings, we'll see a hot spot come up, right? And then they'll try to out-chirp each other on particular issues. And then the clients just go sideways, right? They can't agree on anything at that point. Jonathan, your take on the four-way meeting?
I think it demonstrates the power of having neutrals in the room, which they didn't have, because I think that if you had a financial and a family neutral in the room, they would have been saying, hey, whoa, like, hold up, guys, you know, we need to find some common ground here instead of, you know, start the court process early by fighting about things. So, but I you know, I think that the characters' reaction to those meetings was very accurately portrayed, and you know, I really liked the fact that they included the lawyers ordering lunch in the middle of it, because you know, the characters are feeling super tense, super upset, super powerless, and all of a sudden someone's like, oh, do you want like a caprese salad, or do you want you know, this kind of salad? And you could see the lawyers just switch gears automatically, which shows that what they're doing in the meeting is largely an act, right? They're not really feeling those emotions themselves, but the clients are like, I don't know, I want a ham sandwich, like.
Yeah, and then Nora ordered for Charlie, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nora, sorry, Nicole.
Nicole.
Because Charlie can, for me, is banana bread, right? Are we going to have butter and heat up the banana bread? You know, you get, that's the most important decision of the meeting. But, you know, I echo what Brian says. Really, they're focused on positions and nobody's drilling down the goals and interests. We do a lot of collaborative work. I had one of these meetings relatively recently where it was a four-way meeting and the lawyer didn't have training. And I was thinking, how the hell am I going to do this meeting, right? Well, you just walk in there, and we didn't have an agenda. We didn't have communication guidelines, you know, all the things we're used to having in terms of structuring a good meeting. We ended up doing it using collaborative techniques, but I think Hollywood got it right. This is the way a lot of cases settle and get negotiated, probably more than half of them. is these four-way meetings. Very rarely do they go to court. But that brings us into our next question, Brian, the court hearing.
And
Oh, sorry, go ahead,
Russell,
Abi.
and I was just going to point out, because also in our meetings, when it gets hot and tense, or maybe you want to have a private meeting with your client, they got it right because they show that you can also kind of have a brief break from the meeting where a lawyer and client can go and have a conversation before they come back into the full meeting, back to the full team. So I think they got that right as well.
And the client's question is always, what the hell just happened in there, right? They're overwhelmed, they don't understand the process or what's going on. They feel that it's going badly. And for Charlie, it was, but he couldn't articulate exactly why.
That's right.
So the court hearing, Brian, real or Hollywood treatment here? What's your take?
Well, there were elements of reality, but it was exaggerated, as is often done by Hollywood. You know, one of the things that was happening in that hearing was essentially the lawyers were giving evidence and telling the story of the clients without it coming through the clients themselves by way of an affidavit or any other way. And they were really positional. But we've seen that. We've seen that in court. We've seen how people will do their very best to make the other person look bad in front of the court. And they got pretty dirty. And I've seen that in court often because you really, the goal, one lawyer who's actually become a judge, he said, your goal is to get the judge to like your client. And then they'll find a way to let your client win the case. And so that's what they both were doing, is trying to make the other client look bad so that the judge wouldn't like the other client and that they would be sympathetic toward their own client. So yeah, that strategy is typical. And, you know, it was so, you know, when you think back to their descriptions at the very beginning of the movie of each other, you know, there's none of that here. All it was is twisting the reality, the facts, to make each other look bad.
Yeah. I'm going to jump in here. Where we practice in the Central East region in Ontario, the judges would never permit this conduct. They don't want to see it in the briefs. If there's an experienced lawyer throwing mud and talking trash, they will interrupt and chastise the lawyer and say, we don't conduct matters in the court here. Having said that, I've been in provincial courts in Brampton where the hearings are exactly like this. They talk, the lawyers are talking over each other. The judge loses control of the courtroom. They talk about poor conduct all the time. No, they're chirping each other. They say, you really want to go there? Yeah, let's go there. And then the judge lets them go there. And I have no idea. Maybe it was just the court that day, but I think Hollywood got it right. Some courts are like that.
Yeah.
Superior Court in Ontario is a much more solemn, serious process. Judges would not let you get into your second sentence if you started running a hearing like this, or even interrupting counsel is extremely impolite and not looked upon well. So yeah, that's my take on it. What about you, Abi?
I echo everything you say, but for the parties, it was a lesson. It was a lesson for them to realize that even the slightest thing, as that I forgot to clip the child's car seat into the car, which is not a big deal, which we did before we put the child in the car, it can be used against you.
Yeah.
So it made them feel extremely vulnerable. And you'd remember and now the parties, the cordial relationship that they had at the beginning was in jeopardy. Remember when Nicole went to the husband's home and the two of them were having a conversation and he broke down and she made a joke which she would ordinarily do, which was normal. And then she quickly say, oh, I was joking. Because now everything you say, however innocent, can be used against you in this dirty battle that they were having. So it was an eye-opener for the clients, and it encouraged them from, certainly from experience as well, for them to say, you know what, this court process is not for us. We need to resolve. We shouldn't go further because it's going to damage us even further. And it was clear that the parties still cared about each other. They just want to go their separate ways. Yeah. It didn't need to degenerate into what it could have become. So, the courtroom decorum, yes, but I think the clients took something away from that. And in real life too, sometimes all you need is a first case conference, see how it goes, see what everybody says, see what the judge says, and parties say, you know what, we need to resolve and settle the case, which is why we have more than 95% settlement. In most cases don't go to trial. It's an experience that people do not want to, wish they hadn't experienced. I don't want to continue for the most part.
One thing I think Hollywood got wrong is the professional's responsibility to filter that out, right? Clients bring us all kinds of dirt. They left the child in the car when they went to the ATM, or they've got dirty pictures or text messages or whatever. It's our job to filter that out and to focus on the issues that are before the court. And you didn't see any filtering by the lawyers in this movie. All you saw was them inflaming things and looking for things, and even suggesting hiring a private investigator to find some more things. So I think that part of the movie probably missed the mark. How about you, Jonathan? What did you think of the hearing?
Yeah, I think I agree with all three of you. It really did make the relationship between the parents terrible after that point. And when I was watching the movie, it kind of hit me. That's why it's called Marriage Story, because the story of the actual marriage and the story of the court process kind of had diverged early on, and that's where it really became clear how different the two stories are, the reality and what's being said at court. And it does unfortunately happen. Like, people throw a lot of mud at each other and complain about these trivial things like, oh, he doesn't put them to bed at 7:30, he puts them to bed at 8. Like, who cares? Like the kids are going to be fine whether they're in bed at 7:30 or 8. But parents really get bogged down in these small, minute details. And I agree with you, Russell. That is a good place for the lawyers to step in, or a family professional, and say, hey, let's not worry about that too much. Let's keep the big picture in mind. And you can really see the personal toll that this court process has had on them. They're both feeling extremely awful, extremely stressed all the time. And it does affect their interactions with the child as well. So you want to keep that to a minimum.
A friend of mine who is a family law litigator, every case he took on was in court. This was many years ago, he used to say that the role of a family law litigator is you're either chucking or ducking. and he back in those days, we had fax machines that actually had paper in them. And when his fax machine started humming, he would sometimes jump under the desk and say, "Watch out, incoming!"
That's funny. One thing I think this movie didn't cover off is this, this Greek chorus idea where you have, it didn't occur in this particular storyline, where you have family members or perhaps a new spouse or a new boyfriend or girlfriend also stirring the flames and pushing the litigation in a certain direction. And that could be a whole second part to this movie, but
well, it was there was a scene with Nicole and her mom, and Nicole's mom really liked Charlie,
right?
And Nicole's mom even got Charlie a lawyer, right?
Lawyer, yeah.
And so you can see the tension that would happen, and that does happen. That tension within the family happens when there's a separation.
That's a good point. That was a bit of a Greek chorus. You're right, and the mother wasn't a fan of her separating as well, right? So
right.
So
What
let's
about
talk.
the bench in this case? What about the bench? The way this particular judge was, apart from not having control in the lawyers, he wasn't helpful at all, and that, I think, that missed the mark compared to what we do in our courts.
Right. And he just kind of assumed there's a status quo, which there wasn't, right? Yeah.
Yes.
The bench didn't really provide any direction in this case, other than to order the assessment.
Yeah. Often they would also try to steer the parties towards some sort of alternative dispute resolution process, right? Try to get them to give mediation an honest try before they actually start going through the court process.
Yeah.
That's often the first thing the judge will say is, have you tried mediation? No? Okay. Go and find a mediator.
Yeah. So one of the issues, central legal issues, I think, in this movie is jurisdiction and this concept of mobility. In Ontario, Canada, the test is where the child ordinarily is resident. The court will have jurisdiction. Mom going to LA for an audition does not change the residency in my child. Clearly, the jurisdiction for this case, what should have been New York City if we're applying Canadian law to it. And Jay was kind of getting to that in that first meeting. He said, grab your kid and file in New York, because this is the exact point. Now, the tide started to turn for Charlie a little bit. The fact that they once lived in LA or he was served in LA is irrelevant. But I think when Charlie agreed to let his son attend school while Mom is continuing with the auditions and in her film career, I think that's probably the turning point where you could say there's an argument that residency is now switched to Los Angeles. So that they don't really get too much into it in the movie in terms of when he made that decision, but had Charlie followed Jay's advice at the very beginning, the child probably would have been returned to New York in my assessment. And Mom would have been viewed as doing self-help in trying to commence a proceeding in Los Angeles. And I don't think many judges would have too much sympathy for Mom taking the unilateral conduct. But that's my take. What do you think, Abi?
I agree with you because the jurisdiction was clearly not LA. The child's, certainly by Ontario law anyway, the child's ordinary residence was New York. As you say, if Charlie had listened to his first lawyer, he wouldn't be in that predicament. But he did listen to his second lawyer. And when I was watching the movie, I was thinking,
advice, right?
Yes, I was thinking, what is the strategy here? And I couldn't see the strategy, and it all fell apart at the four-way meeting when Charlie said, "Well, you told me to."
Yeah.
You know, and so, quite frankly, he followed bad advice. He should have stayed. He should have taken the child and gone to New York. I mean, there's other things that Jonathan would jump in and say about, well, is it in the child's best interest to just grab the child? Do we do that to our children? That's a different issue altogether. Right. But in making the decision, following his lawyer's advice, he blames the lawyer later. In following his lawyer's advice to stay, he made that decision to allow Mom and child to reside in LA, which, you know,
that was fatal to this case. Like when they were in that settlement meeting and they had to break out, I even wrote this down. Bert says, well, if I was representing you, you should be doing this. And Charlie, because you are representing me.
You are representing me. Yeah, so that was bad advice. There was no strategy there. There was like, what are we, you know, so.
Brian, so, yeah. What's your take on jurisdiction and mobility here?
Well, I think you're right about jurisdiction, but the judges have said to me that the mobility cases are the most difficult cases they ever have. Because ultimately the test is what is in the best interests of the child. And probably it should have been a New York judge and New York court process. But if the test was what's in the best interest of the child, I think a court would struggle with that one. You know, there is some merit, some truth to the fact that the child was going to be with the mother, who probably had a bigger role in raising the child than the father, and that the child was going to be with family in Los Angeles. There's a lot of family there, and it was helping the mother's career for her to go to LA and have this opportunity. So, you know, these are not easy cases for judges because they have to try to figure out what route this way or that way will be best for the child. And it's not black and white. That's why they get paid the big bucks to make these difficult decisions.
And there's more space in LA, right?
There's more space in LA.
Okay, Jonathan, your take on mobility and jurisdiction?
Yeah, I would agree with what you guys have said. It's a very difficult case, and you know, I think in this movie, it demonstrates how small decisions that you think you're making for the best interest of your child and be amicable, then kind of blow up in your face later on. Because Charlie did let Nicole move out to LA. He thought it was temporary, but she enrolled him in a school there, and she was, you know, living with her mom and spending lots of time with her family. And then this became the defining sort of status quo criteria that the court then used to determine what is the best interest of the children or a child, not taking into account the fact that this child had lived for a significant portion of his life in New York. So it was a tricky situation, and you know, parents have to get good advice very early on from their lawyers. Like, if I let my partner move to Toronto with the child, how is that going to affect things later on? Or, you know, you always have this tension early on in the separation where one of the parents wants to leave, but also doesn't want to leave because they're afraid if they leave, then they're going to establish some sort of status quo that's going to affect them negatively later on in the negotiations. So these early decisions can actually have a massive impact later on down the road, and you may not be aware of what they are unless you get really, really good advice from your lawyer.
You almost need pre-separation legal advice just to find out what your strategy is, right? So that's a great tip. All right, this has been a great discussion so far. The good, the bad, and the ugly. We're going to talk about scenes or character portrayals. I don't mind going first if you guys are good with that. Mine are kind of random. So for what did I have? For good, I had the settlement meeting sidebar. So this is when Bert goes into the room. He goes, well, the way this is going, we may have to go to court. Which is opposite of what he had been advising Charlie throughout the course of his representation. But what I like about this is he realizes he's up against basically an adversarial lawyer, and there's really no room for negotiation. And you need to take a hard look at positions earlier on to see if there's room for settlement. For some families, unfortunately, going to court may be the better choice. If you have somebody who's going to refuse to compromise, or if you come up to one of these lawyers who are overly litigious and they're never going to settle in a settlement meeting. For bad, what I found bad was the service of the court papers without warning. As professionals, we often overlook the effect court papers or a lawyer's demand may have on someone. Clearly, Charlie was devastated when he was given the papers, and we're kind of insulated from that. Usually we have process servers do the service, and we don't really get into that emotional aspect of when somebody actually receives notice that the relationship's coming to an end. And for ugly, my takeaway was the lawyers emoting their client's behavior or even taking actions that are not authorized. And Abi touched upon this a little bit. You know, they taking positional or adversarial stances based on their own opinion or experience. They're not exercising dispassionate legal judgment or analysis. And Abby's example was a great one where the case was settled, but the lawyer tweaked the 50-50 to 55-45 because she didn't want the father bragging that he got 50-50. It was no longer about the family. It was just about the lawyer and her protecting her reputation. So the other really ugly thing is he started to see the child slowly get alienated from his father and that relationship breaking down, which was really quite disheartening. And you can probably see that in a lot of the files that we deal with. So that's what I had for good, bad, and ugly. Do you want to go next, Jonathan?
Sure. As I said before, my favorite scenes were the four-way meeting at the point where they started ordering lunch. So it really kind of highlighted how lost the parents felt. And then the conversation that the lawyers had in the hallway before seeing the judge, where the lawyers were friendly and chatting about weekend plans, and the two parents were just so stressed. So going back to what you were saying, Russ, you really have to be aware of how the clients are thinking and feeling about this and really be empathetic towards them. It's a really tough process to go through, even if everything's amicable. So, you know, we have to be really patient and kind and supportive of our clients in any way we can. And yeah, I did not like the portrayal of the social worker at all. I think it was, I think most of the time, social workers and counselors and psychologists and therapists are not portrayed very well in the movies. And I really take exception to the way that she behaved with the family, because I don't think it would have been very helpful.
Abby, good, bad, and ugly. What are your takeaways here?
So for the good that I take away is with respect to the parties. And it's about right from the beginning through the, go through the thread of it all. You can see how the husband and wife, even though the relationship itself had broken down, how they cared for each other, how they defended each other even when their lawyers wanted to badmouth the other party. You could see that continuous thread that they cared for each other. And it's that care that ultimately carried them through to be able to kind of step out of the process and resolve the matter. And if not for that, this particular process could have destroyed them as a family and have that negative effect on the child. Again, too. Sorry?
And financially as well.
And financially too, because these guys can ill afford it anyway. Right. I think the care that they have for each other, the three things that I saw was, she was in her home, she couldn't close her gate. She calls the husband comes and deals with it. She orders his lunch. This is in the middle of it. She ties his shoelace, so you could see that, they had 10 years together. Like, it wasn't just an absolute disaster at all times. Mm-hmm. The second good that I saw was what Jonathan alluded to earlier on with respect to the initial stage when they were at mediation. Even though mediation failed, the fact that they had written all the good things about each other, that Charlie ultimately heard at the end, or towards the end, was one of the things that you could see, he cried. It softened him because he hadn't really seen things from Nicole's point of view. And he'd never saw it because, the argument they had in his apartment, he didn't see what Nicole was going through. He wasn't able to empathize. But in reading that letter, he realized that she wasn't coming from necessarily a bad place. Yeah. So that was a good for me. So that mediation, it might have failed, but had that effect, good effect. The bad goes back to the lawyers. And how
the damn lawyers.
The damn lawyers. And how the lawyers were with each other. And the lack of civility in the courtroom. Because you have someone who's never been divorced before and experiences that, it leaves a bitter taste in your mouth. And whilst some cases might be like that, you know, I'm thankful that we are not, that's not what it is for the most part. There needs to be civility between lawyers and even just the general public, even with the opposing party, there needs to be that civility. So that was the bad for me. The ugly, again, goes back to the lawyers throwing mud at each other and using anything and everything. You know, do you want to go there? Do you want to go there? That was just ugly. And again, I'm thankful that it's not something that occurs very often in our courts. And we try as better, and our judges don't encourage it, like Russell had said earlier on. That is indeed true. So those are my, you know, good, bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, it's Nora, you could even see in the courtrooms taking her jacket off and getting ready for a street fight, right?
Yeah,
like it was on, but it was so different in the hallway. They're huggy, kissy, coming to my charity event, right? It's like real contrast there. But Brian, good, bad, and ugly, what you got for us?
Well, the good was the statements that the mediator got each of them to write about the other, and that was just heart-wrenching. And how the last scene where Charlie's son was reading the prose that had been written by Nicole, it just really made me tear up with emotion to know the depth of caring that they had for each other. And I guess there was a piece of hope there that after that scene, you felt like, you know, they weren't too damaged by the process that they had gone through, and that maybe they have some sort of relationship now going forward that was positive. And they were separated and divorced, but there was still some connection, some ability to co-parent, and some ability to care for each other still after all they'd gone through. So that was pretty good. One of the bad, I guess, we've talked about this scene before where Nora describes that nobody cares about fathers being good. It's mothers have to be above reproach, but fathers can be, what did she say? Absent and unreliable, and that's okay. And she justified it on Judeo-Christian ethos. So I thought that was a hilarious scene, just hilarious, and so well done by Nora. And the ugliest scene, there was a scene where, for me, it was very painful to watch, where the two of them are in Charlie's apartment. Charlie and Nicole are arguing, and they're down and dirty and saying they never loved each other and how painful it was to be together. And the inner mediator in me wanted to get in there and intervene and stop it, and let me help you. Let's talk about this. Let's show respect for each other. And that was just a really, really painful scene to watch. And it was an ugly experience for both of them. And, you know, that just how they got to that point was very, very sad, that they would have that perspective on each other.
And that was so well acted. It's just the raw emotion. And clients say the worst things about their spouses, and just like they did. And you think, you love this person at one point. You're saying you want them to die of a disease and get hit by a car. It's like,
yes,
the emotion just overruns clients, right? And we've all experienced clients like that, especially where there's a lack of trust or a lack of communication. And that's where the lawyers come in, right? You can direct them to a peaceful resolution, or you can fan the flames and send them off to trial.
Right.
Yeah, great tips, Brian. So we're going to bring this train into the station. I think we've had a great discussion today. Any final thoughts for our viewers or listeners? Brian or Jonathan, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I thought it was a great movie overall. Obviously, I didn't like every single scene, but like you and Brian said, I thought the portrayal of the parents and all the emotional roller coasters that they were going through was very well done, very well acted, very well written. Everything was scripted. None of that was ad lib. So I thought they did an excellent job. And I think it's a real good eye opener as to why we do the work we do to avoid situations like that, to avoid making families worse, and to make the emotional toll of the separation as small as possible.
Don't worry, Jonathan, we're going to still hire social workers despite the movie. Brian, you want to go next? Final thoughts for our viewers and listeners today?
I thought it was an excellent movie, and it was entertaining, but it was also truth-telling. And there were so many elements of reality in that movie that it was that really resonated with me. And I think anybody who's practices as a divorce professional, many of those elements of the movie would resonate with them, and anyone who's gone through a divorce would understand the journey that they went through. So I thought there were many elements that were very truthful and helpful and interesting and entertaining. I thought it was very well done, and when I watched it a second time in preparation for this conversation, I enjoyed it just as much the second time. So yeah, I highly recommend it. Thanks a lot for this opportunity to talk about it.
Great tips, Brian. Abby, final thoughts?
Final thoughts. I'm the same with Brian and Jonathan. Actually, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it was well written. I think it was entertaining as well as educative as well. And it highlights the need for parties necessarily to get legal advice or get advice before they take certain steps. And also, I like the fact that notwithstanding that it's called a marriage story and the parties were divorcing, I like that it was written in a way that you couldn't choose who your favorite character was, either the husband or the wife. It was balanced.
There was no bad person or evil person.
There was no bad person.
Or good versus
it was
evil.
Balanced. Yeah, and you can understand both their perspectives. You can understand why it didn't work. You can understand the need to kind of move on with their lives. But there was no victim and there was no villain. There was, it was written back to balance both perspectives and validate both perspectives as well. So the woman will feel validated because now her voice is heard, and the man as well. So that's my takeaway.
Those are really great. And I think I got more out of it the second time than I did the first time. The first time I had my own views in terms of what should occur, and Charlie singing at the end, I didn't fully get that part. But second time around and you listen to the lyrics, there's a lot of meaning in the writing in the script, and I think it is really well done. So I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Brian, Jonathan, and Abby for joining us today and spending an afternoon talking about this subject. I want to thank.
So Russ, I guess we're giving them 4 thumbs up.
4 thumbs up? Well, it'd be 8, wouldn't it? Because there's 4 of us here.
Yeah, 8.
So yeah, and I want to thank our listeners and our viewers on YouTube. You can like this audio recording or comment on our YouTube channel. We'll answer any questions that you have. You can subscribe by clicking the bell. You get notice of our upcoming YouTube videos, and certainly share this with your friends and family. I have hoped you've learned something from our perspective in terms of the professionals in this movie, A Marriage Story. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today.
Thanks, Russ. It was a really great suggestion. I really appreciate inviting us.
Thanks for having us.
Great fun.
Thank you.